Last week we talked about how Jesus had a showdown with Suhei in the form of Peter when Jesus plainly stated that he was taking Suhei to the cross to die as another component of restoring everything that Adam had lost. We looked at a few verses where Suhei was translated as life instead of soul. Many of those stated that Jesus planned to lay down Suhei in addition to his life. I gave you homework to find other verses where that happened. Did anybody find anything interesting when they did this? Okay, moving right along. I'll leave that out there and you guys can do that at some point. There are some very interesting verses that the meaning really radically changes when you realize that he's not talking about life there. He's talking about Suhei. He's talking about your soul. I lay down my soul, not my life. It makes a lot more sense in many of the verses. So if you need any help doing that, if you need any help figuring out how to do that, let me know and I'll be glad to walk you through it.
What scriptures was that in, or is it in the book?
The places where we went through 4 or 5 of them last week where that was an occurrence. And I gave you homework to look up the rest. Blueletterbible.org would be where you'd go to look at that. You'd pull up instead of the English word, you'd pull up the Greek word. So it'd be I think it's 5590. I think is what it was in the homework. So that's your search in blueletterbible.org. And it'll pull up all the verses where that occurs. And then you just read down the list and see any of them where it tells you which word it's talking about. It gives like a red marking that the word that you're in question is the word that it found, and then how it's translated in, I think it's the King James. But that's what I use to do the search. It'll definitely get you started. You might be able to do it in the New American Standard as well. That part doesn't really matter. Get down to some verses and you'll see some things. One of them I think I mentioned specifically was John 13, was it 37, 38? I'm going from memory here. I don't have it in front of me. Yes, John 13, 37, 38. It should be one of the answers to the homework part. That one is of particular interest to what we talked about last week. At least it was, in my opinion. What I want you to do is just take some time, find some of these verses and start thinking about them. If the correct word is put in there, does it change it? Does it make it more impactful, less impactful? Does it change the meaning you get out of it, the sense you get out of it? Anyway, I don't want to harp on that, but it's worthwhile to do the exercise. Jesus won the round with Suhei manifesting through Peter, but the exalted soul wasn't done yet. Jesus goes to the Garden of Gethsemane for the final round. Suhei pulls out all the stops and pitches a full-blown fit, trying to preserve itself. Jesus begs the Father for another way. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. Apparently, there was no other way to get this done. Suhei had to go all the way to the cross and die. What Adam didn't do, always make the soul subject to God, Jesus completed. So, today, let's talk about the foolishness of the cross. The foolishness of the cross. We ended last week with the rest of the passage where Jesus confronted Peter, who wanted Jesus to have some mercy on poor old Suhei. Let's see that again. Matthew 16, 21 through 26. This is from the Message. Matthew 16, 21 through 26. Then Jesus made it clear to his disciples that it was now necessary for him to go to Jerusalem, submit to an ordeal of suffering at the hands of the religious leaders, be killed, and then on the 3rd day be raised up alive. Peter took him in hand, protesting, "Impossible, Master, that can never be." But Jesus didn't swerve. "Peter, get out of my way. Satan, get lost. You have no idea how God works." Jesus went to work on his disciples. "Anyone who intends upon coming with me has to let me lead. You're not in the driver's seat. I am. Don't run from suffering. Embrace it. Follow me and I'll show you how. Self-help is no help at all. Self-sacrifice is the way, my way, to finding yourself, your true self. What kind of deal is it to get everything you want but lose yourself? What could you ever trade your soul for?" Now watch this. The true disciples He's talking to all of them now. He's saying, okay, here's my plan. Here's what you guys need to do. Here's how you follow me. One of the steps to following me. The true disciple must let Jesus lead. That's what he says, right?
Yes.
He must be in the driver's seat, not you. To what does this refer? What's he addressing there when he makes that statement? My true disciple has got to let me lead. I've got to be in the driver's seat. What's he commenting about? How were they being led up to this point? By their own soul. They were in the driver's seat, not him. They were doing it their way, not his. So what's he really saying to them? You got to kill Suhei. You got to get that sucker off of the throne. You got to dethrone him from your life. He cannot sit in the driver's seat and me be in the driver's seat at the same time. It's not going to work. This is speaking directly to your soul falling in line to follow and obey God and not its own desires. The next sentence. Don't run from suffering, but rather embrace it. Now, what's he still talking about? Does it make sense for him to change thoughts in the middle of his little speech here?
Yeah.
He's still talking about you've got to kick Suhei off the driver's seat. And then he says, don't run from suffering, but rather embrace it. Is it going to be a painful process for you to dethrone Suhei? Absolutely it is. You should expect it. And if it hadn't been painful, you hadn't gotten there yet. And I don't want us to expect pain, but that dude is going to put up a fight. He has been on the throne of your heart for as long as you've been around. And sometimes even after we've gotten saved, he still remains on the throne of our heart. Half the people that we're going to be around today, he's still probably on their throne 90% of the time. Don't run from suffering, but rather embrace it. What's suffering? At least part of the suffering is the pain involved in dealing with Suhei and taking that dude down. Follow Jesus as he shows us how to do this. Okay, he's saying, follow me, I'll show you how to do it. What was he talking about? How was he going to show him how to do it? When did he show him how to do it? Well, what comes shortly after he makes this statement? The cross. The whole ordeal with the cross. I'm going to show you how to do this. You take that sucker to the cross. Follow me. Do what I do. Take that thing to the cross. He was talking about his plan at that moment to take Suhei all the way to the cross and kill it dead. The next part of the verse. Self-help is no help at all. Now, are you starting to see this differently?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What is he addressing here?
Yeah. Your soul.
He's going line by line and saying, here's where your soul is at. Here's what your soul is doing. Here's the mess.
Well, I chuckle just because when it says self-help is no help at all. And, there are so many thousands of self-help books out there to
Right.
how to show you how to do it on your own. And it's so far off the mark of what is of really being helpful.
Why is self-help no help at all?
Because it's your soul.
It's your soul still, or it's somebody else's soul.
Yeah, it's still in charge.
It's not
Yeah.
a spirit change. It's not a different philosophy. It's not from a different camp.
You do the exact opposite.
Right.
Sacrifice yourself,
Right.
meaning your soul. And
If the goal is to bring the soul down, why do we think that it will assist in its own destruction? And yet, how much time have we wasted there?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm doing all this self-help. The goal is to kill that whole part of you. The goal is to bring that to the cross, to destroy it.
it's giving a much better visual picture of what Jesus is going through, even though I can't possibly relate to it, but it's giving you an idea of what Jesus was going through in the garden, his soul just fighting with all its might. not go through with what's getting ready to happen.
So will your soul, or will anybody else's soul, help you destroy the soul?
No.
What's the only thing that can do that? You've got to get a different set of tools. You've got to get a different playbook here before anything will possibly be of assistance in taking that soul down. The soul will only be good at helping to maintain its position. It'll be very good at that. Then it can start lying to you. Then it can start deceiving you. Then it can start twisting things around in your head. Oh, you don't have to go that far. Don't be an extremist here. You don't have to do this. Just be easy. Just be tolerant. Just take it easy here. That's your soul trying to defend itself. Trying to make sure that it doesn't die. Then what would be the opposite of self-help? What's the verse say? What's the opposite of self-help? Self-sacrifice. You can't help yourself. You got to kill it. You can't help it be better. You got to make it die. You choosing to make your soul and its desires less. What is that? That's self-sacrifice. You making the conscious decision, my soul is going down. It is going to decrease. Its influence is going to decrease and minimalize to the point where it's non-existent in my life. That is the way Jesus did it, and it's the same way that he intends for you to do it. Let's look at John, chapter 12, 23 through 28. Now, but the previous passage, when you start thinking about what Jesus was actually dealing with, does it bring a whole new light to that passage? Do you see it now in a different way than you've ever seen it before? And it's like, well, that's obvious. How did I miss that? He replied to them, now is the time for the Son of Man to be glorified. Let me make this clear. A single grain of wheat will never be more than a single grain of wheat unless it drops into the ground and dies. Because then it sprouts and produces a great harvest of wheat. All because one grain died. The person who loves his life and pampers himself will miss true life. But the one who detaches his life from the world and abandons himself to me will find true life and enjoy it forever. If you want to be my disciple, follow me and you will go where I am going. And if you truly follow me as my disciple, the Father will shower his favor upon your life. Even though I'm torn within and my soul is in turmoil, I will not ask the Father to rescue me from this hour of trial, for I have come to fulfill my purpose, to offer myself to God. So, Father, bring glory to your name. Then suddenly a booming voice was heard from the sky. I have glorified my name, and I will glorify it through you again. Now, what do you think it means to truly follow Jesus as his disciple? We start the verse by, if you really want to be my disciple, and then God made a promise. Let's go back and read the promise. My notes are going to get all messed up here, but oh well. Truly follow me. This is verse 26. If you truly follow me as my disciple, the Father will shower his favor upon your life. So what's the promise for you truly being his disciple? God's favor upon your life. That's a pretty good promise. And we've probably heard the promise part of that. But what's the condition? How do you get there? Truly follow me as a disciple. What does that mean? That means yourself has got to die. The promise for those who do this, it's amazing. So it means we should know exactly what it means. Who gets the Father's favor showered upon their life? What was Jesus talking about? How did the verse start? Dying as a seed to bring a harvest. So what's he saying? What is the true action of a true disciple? Dying to yourself. Would it really help if all those following Jesus all physically died?
Not physically died.
No, it wouldn't help at all. We would just be absent. Completely absent.
Can you repeat that question, please?
Would it help if I'm trying to establish, is he talking about we need to physically die or we need to die in some other way? So would it be helpful if all the believers in Jesus physically died? Is the world a better place when we are physically dead?
No.
Not mostly.
Yeah, some people might think so.
Perhaps, but, well, we're just out of their way. Not really a better place.
Wouldn't it be a worse place?
Yes, absolutely. So if he's saying all of the people that truly follow me and want this have to die, what's he saying?
Yes. In other
There's a
words,
part of you that's got to die.
any part of us that doesn't line up with what God tells us to be needs to die. Is that?
Yeah, that's what, yeah, right. In particular, and that whole nature is concentrated in the soul.
Yeah. Take ourselves off of the throne and let Jesus and His
Yes.
Word be sitting
Yes.
on our throne,
Absolutely.
guiding
Yes.
what we do in our choices and everything.
Yes.
That was real graphic.
Okay, if it doesn't make any difference if all the believers just suddenly physically died, would it make a difference if all the believers put their soul under?
Yeah.
Would that change the world?
Put
Yeah,
their soul where?
drastically.
Under. Put it down. Kick it off the throne.
Absolutely.
Follow some other direction. Follow some other guidance. Follow some other leadership.
It would change a lot of things.
It would change a lot of things. So what's he talking about here? To get the blessing of the Father, you've got to die. Your soul has got to be off the throne. It's got to be removed. Jesus continues by talking about the battle that was raging in his soul. Let's go back and look at it. So he says, if you truly follow me as my disciple, and what we're establishing and what that means is you have to die to yourself. Your soul has got to be crucified. It has got to be brought under the lordship of Jesus. Then the Father will show his favor upon you, even though I'm torn within and my soul is in turmoil. So what's he talking about? This is already starting to cost me something. I'm starting to deal with the ramifications of my soul wanting to be in charge. I'm already feeling the pains of this battle. Even though I'm torn within and my soul is in turmoil, I will not ask the Father to rescue me from this hour of trial. Now, in the garden, did he ask him to rescue him from it? No, he didn't.
But not as
No,
well.
He asked if there was another way.
Right.
But he never said anything about, I don't want to do this. God, if there's any other option, I'm up for option B. But don't spare me from option A if there's no other way to get this done. I will not ask the Father to rescue me from this hour of trial. Why? What's the basis for him saying, I'm not going to ask him to rescue me from this hour of trial? For I have come to fulfill my purpose, to offer myself to God. What was his purpose? I'm going to put Suhe on the cross. I'm going to make that sucker die. I'm going to make it submit. I'm going to make it obey God and not its own desires and not its own will. You see how all this is connecting? My soul is really fighting hard here, but I'm not going to ask God to get me out of this because this has been my purpose all along. Did Jesus come with a plan to deal with Suhe? Among other things, yes, but that cannot be excluded from that conversation. And that's the part of this that's new to me, is I didn't realize the emphasis that he had on the plan to take Suhe to the cross. I'm going to offer myself, my whole self, including Suhe, to God. And that's the thing that Adam didn't do. And that's the result of Adam not doing it. We've been in this mess for all this period of time. In this context, what is Jesus saying when he asks the Father to bring glory to his name? Okay, I'm not going to ask the Father to remove me from this. That single seed has got to die before it can be harvested. I'm not going to ask the Father to remove this, even though my soul's going nuts right now. Even though my soul's throwing up a fit. It's fighting for its very existence. It's fighting for its very survival. Even though all that's true, I was born to do this. So I'm not going to ask the Father to remove it. So Father, glorify your name. What's he saying? What's he talking about? What's he mean? Bring glory to yourself as you help me take this monster to the cross. And then suddenly, a booming voice heard from the sky. I've glorified my name. I have already glorified my name, and I'm about to do it again through you and through what you're about to offer on that cross. God the Father couldn't stay silent. Through your life, I've already brought glory to my name. But he didn't stop there. I'm about to glorify my name through you again. What did he mean? I'm about to bring even more glory to myself because you are taking your whole body, including Suhei, to the cross to finish this process once and for all. And in so doing, you're going to put Suhei back in its rightful place as a servant and not as a master. As the one that assists following the commands and the directives and the leadership of the Holy Spirit, not as one that impedes it, not as one that gets in the way, not as one that voices an alternate opinion. Let's look at verse 25 a little more closely. The person who loves his life and pampers himself will miss true life, but the one who detaches his life from this world and abandons himself to me will find true life and enjoy it forever. Now notice the colors. The two in red are Suhei. The one in blue is Zoe. There's another word, life, in this particular version, and that's not really in the Greek. It was just added for emphasis by this particular translator. So I'm not going to really talk about that. It doesn't really detract either way. It's just not part of this discussion at the moment. Let's read this again if we substitute and translate. This is the same verse, but I have revised it a little bit. The person who loves his soul and pampers himself will miss true life. Now, isn't that true? If you pamper yourself, what are you doing? And I'm not saying it's wrong to pamper yourself. I'm not saying that at all. Don't hear me say that.
You're following the world.
But you're following the world. Who's in charge? What part of you is being edified? Your soul. Now, that does not mean at all you can't go on a nice vacation or you can't enjoy yourself and be pampered and go to a day. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying if you live your life day after day after day after day after day doing nothing but pandering to your soul, what do you get?
An exalted soul.
You get an exalted soul, which is more of the problem that you're dealing with.
Yeah, the problem is we're leaving the relationship out of Christ. We're not in spirit at all.
The person who loves his soul and pampers himself will miss true life, but the one who detaches his soul from this world and abandons himself to me will find God's true life and enjoy it forever. Does that make more sense? The one who, read it the other way, the one who detaches his life from this world and abandons himself to me will find God's true life and enjoy it forever. Does that make sense? How can you detach your life from this life? But you can detach your soul from this life. So this is one of those verses where the translation matters. You have to understand what the Greek words are actually saying before the verse even really makes sense. I have mentioned this before, that everything Jesus did was an attack on Suhei. The way that he was born, the life that he lived, the things he said, the things he did. Why would you be surprised if his death continued that trend? Why would his death be any different than the rest of his life, which was a continual bombardment against the wishes of Suhei? And the answer to the question is, it's not any different. It also was a direct confrontation to Suhei. A direct assault on Suhei's power and Suhei's enthronement. I'm getting stirred up about this. Maybe you couldn't tell. 1 Corinthians 1, 17 through 31. This is from the Passion Translations. 1 Corinthians 1, 17 through 31. For the Anointed One has sent me on a mission, not to see how many I could baptize, but to proclaim the good news. And I declare this message stripped of all philosophical arguments that empty the cross of its true power. For I trust in the all-sufficient cross of Christ alone. To preach the message of the cross seems like sheer nonsense to those who are on their way to destruction. To us who are being saved, now note that, to us who are being saved, what's that talking about? What's that referred to? You started the process of salvation at the born again experience. Your insides were recreated, reformed. You got God's DNA, and then you started the journey on the outside. The process of being saved on the outside, in your soul. It's the mighty power of God released within us. For it is written, I will dismantle the wisdom of the wise and will invalidate the intelligence of the scholars. So where is the wise philosopher who understands? Where is the expert scholar who comprehends? Where is the skilled debater of our time who could win a debate with God? Hasn't God demonstrated that the wisdom of this world system is utter foolishness? For in his wisdom, God designed all the world's wisdom would be insufficient to lead people to the discovery of himself. He took great delight in baffling the wisdom of the world by using the simplicity of preaching the story of the cross in order to save those who believe it. For the Jews constantly demand to see miraculous signs, while those who are not Jews constantly cling to the world's wisdom. But we preach the crucified Messiah. The Jews stumble over him, and the rest of the world sees him as foolishness. But for those who have been chosen to follow him, both Jews and Greeks, he is God's mighty power, God's true wisdom, our Messiah. For the foolish things of God have proven wiser than human wisdom, and the feeble things of God have proven to be far more powerful than any human ability. Brothers and sisters, consider who you were when God called you to salvation. Not many of you were wise scholars by human standards, nor were many of you in positions of power. Not many of you were considered the elite when you answered God's call. But God chose those whom the world considered foolish to shame those who think they are wise. God chose the puny and the powerless to shame the high and the mighty. He chose the lowly, the laughable in the world's eyes, nobodies, so that he would shame the somebodies. For he chose what was regarded as insignificant in order to supersede what is regarded as prominent, so that there would be no place for prideful boasting in God's presence. For it is not from man that we draw our life, but from God, as we are being joined to Jesus. Note the language there. We are being joined to Jesus. I thought you were already joined to Jesus. On the inside you were. But you are being joined to him on the outside. Your head is now being joined to Jesus. And now he is our God-given wisdom, our virtue, our holiness, and our redemption. And this fulfills what was written. If anyone boasts, let him boast only in all that the Lord has done. Okay, let's read verse 23 from a couple of different versions so that you see this very clearly. Verse 23, but we preach Christ crucified, a message which is to the Jews a stumbling block that provokes their opposition, and to the Gentiles foolishness, just utter nonsense. But as for us, we tell people how Christ died on a cross. That is a message that Jewish people refuse to accept as true. Gentile people think that it is a silly message. What was his message? What did Paul preach? Christ crucified. Not that just he died. That's an important part of it, but that he was crucified. Why that word? That's part of it. That's not where he's going with this, but that's definitely part of it. Notice that Paul did not just preach Jesus. The message was incomplete if it stopped there. He makes a point of saying that he and the other legitimate disciples preached Christ crucified on the cross. Why? Why did they emphasize that part of this so insistently over and over and over again? What?
That's the victory.
The victory, yes. Yes, absolutely. Victory over what would be my question?
Our sin.
Our sin, yes. But there's more to it.
Soul.
Our soul, right, there you go. And that's what he's alluding to, is he preached Christ crucified on a cross because that is going to impact the soul more than anything else. Give me a minute, I'll explain why. He makes a point of saying that he and the other legitimate disciples preached Christ crucified on the cross. This full message, not just part of it, was the stumbling block and the foolishness. Do you see how that's worded there? The full message of Christ being crucified on a cross was the part of this that was a stumbling block and foolishness. Now, why was crucified on a cross a stumbling block? Why was crucified on a cross foolishness? So if our version of Jesus isn't a stumbling block and it's not foolishness, In our current culture, what changed? What did we change about the way we preach this so that it won't be a stumbling block, so that it won't be foolishness? We've removed the cross.
It made it more palatable.
We have removed the impact of the cross. We have removed the death that the cross represents to our soul.
Yeah. It's an easier message to preach to people.
Absolutely.
Because it's not as harsh.
We started watering it down. We made it more palatable to Suhe so that it wouldn't be offended. We made it appealing to Suhe instead of appalling to Suhe. The Greek word for stumbling block is skandalon. We can see that we get the word scandal from scandalon. That makes sense. The scandalon was the trigger on an animal trap that held the bait on that trap. I want you to think about that. The scandalon is the stick that holds the bait for an animal trap. Now let's watch this verse. This is from the Amplified Classic, same verse. We preach Christ, the Messiah crucified, preaching which to the Jews is a scandal and an offensive stumbling block that springs a snare or a trap. And to the Gentiles it is absurd and utterly unphilosophical nonsense. So it's commenting on that word scandalon. Scandalous. We don't really want to talk about scandal. We don't want to talk about scandalous. And the idea of bait on a trap just isn't real appealing unless you're a hunter. For the animal trap, what is the bait? Now think this through. What is the bait of an animal trap?
Well, something enticing.
Something enticing. What are most animals that they're going to be trying to catch going to be attracted to?
Food, whatever their food source is.
Okay, what is it? In most cases, what is
It's an injured animal.
an injured animal? It's meat.
Meat,
Raw meat. Bloody, raw meat. Jesus, on the cross, was the bloody, raw meat held on the stick.
So,
Now, if you remove that, if you present a gospel that doesn't have that in it, what have you done?
Taking out the victory.
You've taken out the victory. You've also taken out the stumbling block.
yeah.
You have removed people's resistance to.
Nullified the gospel.
You have. You've cut parts of it out.
They rarely describe exactly what Jesus looks like on the cross as far as what physically his physical appearance. Because if they were given it in detail, it's very graphic.
Right.
And yeah, they don't explain that a whole lot.
Why?
What was the
It's
movie
too,
Mel
it's
Gibson
too,
made?
it's too graphic
It's too graphic. For what?
for people to accept and want to visualize.
It's not palatable
Yeah.
to our souls.
Yeah.
What was the name of the movie Mel Gibson?
The Passion of the Christ.
The Passion of the Christ. If you've seen it, it is horrible.
It's very graphic, yes.
Extreme.
But this was very graphic.
Does it justice still.
All right, I want to illustrate this with this example. Now, I'm not saying anything bad about this. This is something I've thought about before. People wear crosses on their necklaces and they have crosses all the time. And they're gold, they're silver, they're beautiful crosses. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with doing that. But I really want you to think about what you're doing there. What if I wore a necklace that had a lethal injection shot, or an electric chair, or a gallows, or any other form of execution? What if I wore that as a necklace? Is that appealing? Does that draw any sort of, oh yeah, that's cool? But no, it's our ornate, decorated, smooth, pleasant crosses that we wear.
But it would be better if we wore like a wooden one with a chunk of meat on there and flies and stuff.
And people are going to start talking about that. Why?
That would be better.
It's the message of the cross is an affront to our soul.
So, only the Roman Catholics?
No, they left him on there. They left Jesus on.
Well,
Left him on there, but he's not.
He's not there anymore.
Messed up.
And I'm not saying we ignore the resurrection at all. I'm not saying that. That's not at all what I'm getting at here. What I'm getting at is we have totally changed the idea of the cross to being this beautiful thing rather than this symbol of torture, rather than this symbol of execution. It no longer is confrontational to us. It no longer reveals to us the true nature of what happened there, of what died there.
Well, that's what's happening with going through this. The cross takes on a
Whole new meaning when you see it.
meaning.
And that's also why Paul was saying, if we skip that part of the cross, your soul doesn't have anything to be objected by anymore. It's the idea of the cross that is offensive to the soul. Why? The soul doesn't want any part of the cross. It doesn't make sense. Think about if your soul is in charge, how would this Messiah die? Oh, he'd slip quietly into the night. Restful sleep, and you just didn't get up in the morning. Say it again.
In a fiction, written into a fiction book.
Fiction, okay. It wouldn't be on a cross. If your soul was writing the story, it wouldn't be on a cross. Why? That cross means death to it. That cross portrays the death that it suffered, the loss that it sustained. So if when we're preaching and we remove the cross from the gospel, what are we saying? Oh, Jesus came and he took care of your sins and he paid an awful price for it. But let's not talk about that. Let's just talk about what you get out of the deal. Not to mention, he really expects you to take your soul to that cross too. Oh no, that's not palatable at all. That's offensive to Suhe.
Well, some of them, some just died that way.
Yes. Not all of them.
No,
Some of them, yes.
of them.
And had they not have done this process, had they not have seen Suhe had to die and gone through the exercise of killing it, they wouldn't have died as martyrs either. What'd you say?
Oh, I said that.
Okay. We have omitted the only portion of the gospel that has the power to kill the thing that's killing us. We've removed it. We've totally stricken it so that it is more palatable, so that it is more acceptable. We're so desperate to see people come forward during our altar call that we have diluted the message. If Suhe doesn't go to the cross, then it remains on the throne of your lives. Jesus would be violating our free will if he removes Suhe by force. Without exposure to the cross, there's no power to remove the previous ruler or its regime. Jesus will not share the throne with anyone or anything. You decide. You choose. I'm going to read that passage again. And as we read it this time, I want you to watch for the condition of the soul or its reaction to the cross. Stop me when you see it and we'll discuss it briefly. So we're going to read that passage again. And every time you see something that says, okay, this is the soul's response to the cross. This is the soul's condition. Get my attention and let's just stop and comment on it as we read this passage again. Here we go. For the Anointed One sent me on a mission, not to see how many I could baptize, but to proclaim the good news. I declare this message stripped of all philosophical arguments. You see anything there? Why would you add a philosophical argument to the message? To appease the soul. To make it more palatable. To make it more rational. To make it more user-friendly for the intellectuals in the crowd. So I stripped all the philosophical arguments that empty the cross of its true power. Go ahead.
No, I just thought of something. When you take world history, Paul addressed philosophical arguments. I think he did it on purpose because this was also during the time
Yes.
period of Socrates and yeah, thank you.
Right.
All the bigwig mental giants,
Right.
and so he could have used any other word right there, but he used philosophical arguments which really hits home to the Suhe.
Now, he's not saying that he didn't ever deal with philosophical arguments. He's saying that his message of the gospel didn't contain those.
But there's other part.
Oh, absolutely. He went and he confronted them where they lived, in their philosophy, in the mess of their culture. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. But his message of the gospel, when he presented the gospel, it didn't have all the philosophical stuff in it.
Sure.
That was just a way, a method for him to get to the real gospel. Here, you believe this. I went through all this and I saw all these statues to your gods, and the unknown God was there. And let me tell you about that unknown God. And then he used the philosophical to get him to the point of the presentation of the gospel, but he didn't include the philosophical stuff anymore in the presentation of the gospel. It got him to it. You see the difference? What do we do today? We include the philosophical in the gospel so that Suhe is not totally offended. Arguments of the philosophical arguments that empty the cross of its true power. For I trust in the all-sufficient cross of Christ alone. To preach the message of the cross seems like sheer nonsense to those who are on their way to destruction. Now, doesn't it? What do you mean he had to die on a cross? I don't get that. I don't like that. Surely your God could die another way. Do you see how offensive the cross is to the soul and how we tried to pander to the soul? To those who are on their way to destruction. But to us who are being saved, in the process of being saved, what? The true message of the cross is the power of God that is released within us. For it is written, I will dismantle the wisdom of the wise. You see more soul there? What's he using to dismantle the wisdom of the wise? The preaching of the cross. Not just preaching of the gospel, the preaching of the cross. I will invalidate the intelligence of scholars. Where's that come from? What is that? These people are motivated by their soul. They're directed by their soul. I'm going to invalidate that by preaching the cross. So where's the wise philosopher who understands? The expert scholar who comprehends? Where's the skilled debater of our time who could win a debate with God? Now, I know a lot of people that think they could win a debate with God.
Yeah, that's how stupid that is.
And it would actually be funny to watch. Job comes to mind when he's saying all this stuff about God, and God finally shows up on the scene, had enough, and goes, okay, let's sit down and let's talk. You said this. Where were you when I made it? You said this. Where were you when I created that? You said this. Where were you when I made that happen? And it was a few chapters later, after a pretty good tongue lashing, and Job ends up saying, whoa, I way overspoke. I spoke things about that I didn't even understand. I'm sorry.
This reminds me of people today that says we're destroying the planet.
Absolutely, yes.
And I want to go,
It's the same sort of deal.
God's planet, he made it, he's
It's the same sort of deal.
I just want to hit it. I don't.
Yeah, good.
And I don't tell that much. No, I'm telling you how I feel, not what I do. I've learned a little bit.
Good. Yeah, that's
Oh, but that might be pretty interesting to watch on CNN. Tell somebody, hey, I know her.
I go in my bedroom and I say quietly to the TV.
Hasn't God demonstrated that the wisdom of this world... Whoops. Where am I at? There. The wisdom of this world system is utter foolishness. How did he demonstrate that? The cross.
Yes.
Well, one thing about the way God did this whole deal says to them, your plan is foolishness. The cross. It makes no sense.
Well, especially to the leaders of the Hebrews at the time. Remember what he said to him? You can destroy this body and in 3 days
I'll build it back up. Right. For in his wisdom, God designed that all the world's wisdom would be insufficient to lead people to the discovery of himself. Why is the world's wisdom, all of it, insufficient to lead people to a discovery of God? Because it's soul driven, it's soul made up, it's soul inspired, and it omits the cross. He took great delight in baffling the wisdom of the world by using the simplicity of preaching what? The story of the cross in order to save those who believe. So the simplicity of God's wisdom is the cross was the way that Jesus killed Suhei. For the Jews constantly demand to see miraculous signs, while those who are not Jews constantly cling to the world's wisdom. But we preach the crucified Messiah. We don't do either one of those things. We don't need to see signs. We don't cling to the world system because we preach what? Not just the Messiah, the crucified Messiah. The Jews stumble over him, and the rest of the world sees him as foolishness. But for those who have been chosen to follow him, both Jews and Greeks, he is God's mighty power. He who? He, Jesus, the crucified Messiah, is God's mighty power, God's true wisdom, and our Messiah. For the foolish things of God have proven to be wiser than human wisdom. And the feeble things of God have proven to be far more powerful than any human ability. Brothers and sisters, consider who you were when God called you to salvation. Not many of you were wise scholars by human standards. Thank God that wasn't a requirement. Nor were many of you in positions of power. Again, thank God that was not a prerequisite. Not many of you were considered the elite when you answered God's call. I wonder if there's a reason for that. Now think about it. If you were one of those categories, how likely are you to receive this message? You think you've got it all figured out. You think you've got it all handled. You think you've got it all under control. And this message is repulsive to your sense of order and decency and your intellect and all this other stuff.
We're supposed to keep praying for them, right?
Yes.
God will open the eyes of their heart.
But we will do that more effectively when we get us fixed and we start doing this. But God chose those whom the world considered foolish to shame those who think they are wise. And God chose the puny and the powerless to shame the high and the mighty. He chose the lowly and the laughable in the world's eyes, nobodies, so that he would shame the somebodies. Now, think about all this in terms of the cross. Is the cross a glorious death? It's brutal. It was the lowest of criminals. They did things to Jesus to make an example of him. It was diabolical in its nature. Is that message confrontational to the wisdom of the world? Absolutely it is. He chose the lowly and the laughable in the world's eyes, nobodies, so that he could shame the somebodies. He chose what is regarded as insignificant in order to supersede what is regarded as prominent, so that there would be no place for prideful boasting. So that there would be no place for prideful boasting. Where's the prideful boasting come from? The soul. What did he do to combat the prideful boasting? Nailed it to the cross. I'm going to do this in such a way that your soul cannot accept it. And for the only way for you to be part of this team, to be part of this movement, is your soul's got to go to the same place Jesus' soul went to.
When the rich young ruler.
Hang on, we're going to get there in just a second. You're ahead of me.
I didn't know that.
You're good. I like it when that happens. Hang on. So there be no place for prideful boasting in God's presence, for it is not from man that we draw our life, but from God. Now think about that. In the context of the soul, it's not from man that we draw our life. How have we tried to draw our life from man? Man's ideas, man's plans, man's philosophies, man's logic, man's wisdom. We've tried to base our life on that, and it's ended up creating us this mess. It is not from man that we draw our life, but from God, as we are being joined to Jesus, the Anointed One. And now he is our God, given wisdom, our virtue, our holiness, and our redemption. And this fulfills what is written, if anyone boasts, let him only boast in all that the Lord has done. That's even a soul verse. If you're going to boast only on what the Lord has done. What does that exclude? Boasting about what you've done. If you're boasting only about what God has done, you can't take credit for anything else. Homework. Read that passage again in other versions. Look for the condition of the soul and its reaction to the cross. What happens if we don't preach the cross? Why is the cross so effective against Suhei? I'll send this out again later.
It makes my stomach sick.
Okay. Luke 18, 18 through 27. Luke 18, 18 through 27. One day, one of the local officials asked him, "Good teacher, what must I do to deserve eternal life?" Jesus said, "Why are you calling me good? No one is good, only God. You know the commandments, don't you? No illicit sex, no killing, no stealing, no lying, honor your father and mother." Verse 21, he said, "I've kept them all for as long as I can remember." Now, if we stop right there, what do you see? What do you hear?
The Suhei screaming.
Suhei screaming, not necessarily in protest, but in pride.
Yeah.
Oh, awesome. I've already done all of those things. Yay me. But the conversation didn't end there. Don't pop your buttons off your shirt too quickly, because the conversation is about to continue. At this point, has Jesus demanded anything from Suhei? Do you think Jesus is going to let it stand without making a demand on Suhei? You're good right now, dude. I don't need to tell you anything else. You've already got it all figured out. It's just probably not going to stop right there. As evidenced by the fact that we stopped at verse 21, and I told you we're going to 26. But anyway, that logic aside. Jesus wasn't done yet. He continues. Verse 22. When Jesus heard that, when he heard what? All these things have I already done for my whole life. I'm there. I've arrived. I've got this all figured out. I've got this all fixed. When he heard that, he said, "There's only one thing left to do. Sell everything you own and give it away to the poor. You will have riches in heaven. Then come and follow me." This was the last thing the official expected to hear. He was very rich and became terribly sad. He was holding on tight to a lot of things and not about to let them go. So Jesus says, you know the commandments, this, and this. Oh yeah, I've done all those. I'm just so amazing. I'm just so wonderful. One thing you lack. Sell all that you have, give to the poor, and then you'll have riches in heaven. Oh, man. Now what is he attacking? Now what is Jesus making a demand of? Your soul's got to die. Something about your soul and your desire to possess and your desire to control, it's in the way. It's got to die. And the way you kill it is intentionally act against it. Intentionally do something that is not in its nature. That's not in its desire. Other versions of this verse say about the ruler's response, instead of becoming terribly sad, they say exceedingly sorrowful, greatly distressed, deeply grieved, heavy, downcast. Now, what do those sound like? Where do those come from? You see how the soul is pitching a fit here? Look, Jack, we were fine until you started confronting me directly. I don't mind keeping all those commandments. I don't mind doing all that stuff. I've done that all this time. I'm good if you would have stopped there. But wait a minute, you didn't stop there. You're asking me to do something more. You're asking me to deal with the thing that's in charge of my life. My money. The pride in my soul. You're asking me to put the real me, the real driving force of me, to death in a sense. Yep, that's exactly what he was asking. 24 through 25. Seeing his reaction. What reaction? This manifestation of the soul just spewing all over the place with emotions, with stuff that's not godly, not following God's plan. Seeing his reaction, Jesus said, "Do you have any idea how difficult it is for people who have it all to enter into God's kingdom? I'd say it's easier to thread a camel through the needle's eye than to get a rich person into God's kingdom." "Then who has any chance at all?" the others asked. No chance at all," said Jesus, "if you think you can pull it off by yourself. Every chance in the world if you trust God to do it." Now, was Jesus saying that you can't have any money?
No.
What was he saying? I don't care how much money you have, but money can't have you.
He was exalting his money above God.
There was something else on the throne. There was something else ruling his life. I like to teach this passage. It's easier to get a rich person into God's kingdom. It didn't say it was impossible. It said it's easier to do it. And then later he goes on to say, with God, with men, this is impossible. But with God, all things are possible. And then the disciples' response in verse 26, then who has any chance at all? Now, why would you say that? If, as so many people like to portray, all the disciples were broke, had no money, had no resources, and Jesus tells this rich guy, you got to sell everything you have and give it to the poor. Wouldn't their response be, yeah, Jesus, you tell him?
They were businessmen. They were fishing.
Exactly.
Island fishing boats were the currency of the day.
The way they asked the question means they were not broke themselves. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done that. If you're broke in the crowd and Jesus tells, hey, you need to be broke. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, you tell him, Jesus. But if they had some resources themselves and Jesus said, you got to get rid of everything. Whoa, what does that mean for me? Do we have to do that too? Anyway, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. I just want you to think about that response. Does God have a problem with you having money? No. He does have a problem with money or anything else having you. A few verses later, he makes that point more clearly. Verse 25 from some other versions. For it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man, note how this amplifies, a rich man who places his faith in wealth or status to enter the kingdom of God. So it's not just a rich man, it's a rich man who places his faith in his wealth or in his status. That person, it's very difficult for them to enter the kingdom of God. The Easy says it this way. The hole in the needle is very small. A camel cannot go through it. But it is even more difficult than that for a rich person to let God rule in their life. Again, it's about who's on the throne. And that's something. Did you get one, Chris?
I did not.
You didn't get one last week?
I need to, okay.
Y'all two did, right?
I wasn't here.
Carla did.
You
No,
were
I
here.
didn't get anything last week.
You probably got several of these over the years.
Oh, well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Now, I want you to place yourself in this rich guy comes to your church, and everybody knows he's rich. Everybody knows he's got some resources. And he comes in and he starts giving his resume. I've never lied. I've never committed adultery. I've never committed murder. I've never done any of this stuff. What are most churches going to say? Oh, yeah, we want you to be on our deacon team. It doesn't really matter what else is true in your life, what else is going on, what else is not happening in your life. Just those things alone, and the fact that you come in here with money, we want you on our team. So when Jesus says, the only way you're going to continue to follow me is if you sell it all and give it away. Whoa. You mean he can't be part of our team? Whoa. What do you think would have happened? Some well-meaning usher or deacon or somebody would have caught the dude at the back door and said, now look, we know he gets a little radical sometimes.
But it's okay.
It's okay. He didn't really mean it. We'll talk him out of it. We'll talk him through it. We'll make sure that he understands what we're doing here. And besides that, he's not going to be around long anyway. And we'll be in charge when he leaves. And we can do whatever we want. And we need your money.
They will appease the soul.
Exactly.
That's what they're doing.
Regardless of the message, regardless of what they're saying, it's important that we don't lose this cat.
That's what's going on in Washington.
It's exactly what's going on in Washington on a much larger scale. But it's easy to dismiss Washington as, that whole thing is corrupt. It's a little more real when it says they do that here. And I'm not saying that they do it here. I'm just saying in churches across the land, you will see this activity over and over and over again. This guy ended up, at least in this story, walking away without receiving because his soul was offended. I wonder what would be different in our churches if we preached the whole gospel, including the cross. Would you have as many people come to the altar? Probably not. But the people that do come, would it be more legitimate? Would they be more serious about what they were signing up for? I think that it would. So if you look at the numbers 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, it might be a wash. Anyway, I'm hoping that you're starting to see how that Jesus constantly was dealing with Suhei in his life and in everybody else's life. And most people don't even realize it. After Adam's fall, we could never come to God on our own terms. So God sends Jesus to open a way for us to come back to God. We had nothing to do with that plan. We brought nothing to the table of any value in that negotiation. So now, in this seeker-sensitive church environment, why do we think that we can suddenly define the terms of our agreement? Where did we get permission to appeal to the very thing Jesus constantly opposed and ended up taking to the cross? Does it make sense that Jesus would allow us to bow down to something that he determined to kill? It doesn't. If we want God's Zoe life, we can't let it live either.